To understand the crisis, we first need to look at the mortgage system. Tom is a banker with lots of money. Bob, on the other hand, is a plumber with not so much money. Because Tom has good credit, he belongs to the prime grade, while Bob, with not so much credit, belongs in the subprime grade. When Tom and Bob wants to buy a house, they will borrow money from the bank. This money from the bank is called mortgage. Mortgage involves paying back interest to the bank and making houses become security. This means when you fail to pay interest, bank can take away the house. This is called foreclosure. Traditional mortgage had fixed rate of interest, which means the interest to pay back to the bank stays the same. Many people who use subprime mortgage could not afford this rate. This is where adjustable rate mortgage, in short ARM, comes in. ARM offered fixed rate for 2 years, then the rate changes depending on the interest rate of the market. When the interest rate goes up, ARM also goes up, and vice versa. Now that we know how mortgage system works, let's move on to the MBS, the mortgage-based security. When people pay their mortgages, bank collects the money and puts them into a mortgage pool. Bank can then divide the right to this money in mortgage pool and sell to other investors. This right is called MBS, but that's not all. When you take a closer look, you can see that there are many types of MBS. Imagine MBS as a big chunk of chocolate. You could break this chocolate down to small pieces and give it to your friend. This is basically how collateralized mortgage obligation works. Break MBS into small bits and sell it again to other investors. Another type of MBS is collateralized debt obligation. Imagine MBS as a piece of clothes. Quality of the clothes may vary depending on its grade. AAA could be a silk, while B is a rag. When you knead these various clothes together, you get a funny looking kilt. This kilt is a CDO. It is a combination of many different grades of MBS to make it look more attractive, while in reality it isn't. So, when all these risky deals regarding MBS were going on, what was stakeholders thinking? One thing was certain, none of these stakeholders were cautious enough. The subprimes were only focusing on their houses. Brokers only cared for their incentives from the contracts they got signed. Government committee and banks never really understood what they were dealing with, but focused on that cash inflow only. Poet T.S. Eliot said in his poem, The Hollow Men, world ended not with a bang but a whimper. Same could be said about the dawn of the subprime crisis. It all started with ARM rising as US interest rates increased. This didn't seem like a big deal at the time. As ARM demanded more from the borrowers, many people, especially the subprimes, were unable to pay back the due money to the bank. With people failing to pay back their mortgage, banks started to foreclose houses. However, this wasn't helping the banks as supply in housing skyrocketed while demand stayed the same. As the borrowers of mortgage collapsed, the mortgage cash inflow also ran out. Mortgage cash running out meant that MBS was no longer as profitable as before. Soon, the value of MBS became worthless. From what was once praised to be a risk-free, high-profit financial product, MBS became as worthless as a pile of animal dung. Many investors were competitively investing in MBS. When the bubble burst, stock prices started to drop. Hence, the subprime mortgage crisis began. The effect it had on US economy. Before the crisis, investors from all around the world were putting their money in US MBS market. When stock prices plummeted in domestic US, these foreign investors such as Barclays of UK, IKB of Germany, and IBC of Holland suffered greatly. As investors in US made a loss, they wanted their money back from other investments. This caused demand in US dollars to rise and affected foreign currencies such as English pounds and euros. During 2008, shortly after the stock crash, US government frantically poured the tax money to save the big boys from failing. Most texts or regulations given around this time were makeshift texts to put out the fire. A proper regulation to stop the economic crisis from happening again was not ready until 2010. The Dodd-Frank Act was introduced to monitor and maintain the economic system. One of the roles Dodd-Frank Act did was to stop the investment banks from using the retail banks' money. By preventing this from happening, the government hoped to minimize the risk and loss of money of ordinary people when investment banks failed. This was Volcker Rule. Dodd-Frank Act also gave the Fed several new jobs as well. One such job was to do a regular checkup annually on all of the big boys of the economic system. This was called stress test. The Fed is now also restricted from saving a single particular company like they did in 2008. They could, however, use the tax money to help the industry as a whole. This was called Emergency Stabilization Powers. Other job that Fed had to do was to make sure that risky banks didn't cause the domino effect. This was called Breakup Powers. When Fed thought it was necessary, they could sever the connection of risky banks with other banks and firms. By doing so, Fed could mitigate the damage and control the situation. Now that we are nearing the end, I ask you this: are we safe? Following is an advertisement from the Super Bowl. We saw how subprime mortgage crisis began and the effect it caused to the world. We have also seen how US government tried to fix the crisis with taxpayers' money, despite the fact that it was caused by the Wall Street. And yet we see today how an advertisement of easy mortgage has risen from the ashes of Lehman Brothers. Now I ask you again, have we forgotten our lesson?